So, with Heroscape, this is where it all started. This was where the magic begins. And as I was explaining to you, with the terrain, you would get this really durable plastic geomats, I guess you would call them, or battle mat, however you wanted to refer to it. And they would all interlock. As a matter of fact, if you look at the design here, each tile would drop in and then lock into itself to make an almost seamless, at that point, map. So the cool thing was, the game would start out with you building a map for your scenario. For the demonstration of this video, we're just going to connect two of these together. Put that there. And we'll put one here. Put one here. And what the heck, we'll just keep it even across the board and we'll mirror the two. So everything, well, looks pretty well identical, because there's a reason behind this and we're going to explain that. So after your map was built, it was at that point drafting your army. So you'd go through and you would agree on a point value. Every single card at that point would give you a point value, how much it costs. So you would say, hey, let's build however many point army, whether standard was about 200 points, and it could go up from there, just depending on how long of a game you really wanted to play. So at that point you would go through and you would select your cards, find your miniatures to go with those cards, and then it was time at that point to begin play. So play was pretty simple, and you would have a series of actions you could use in each turn. It was at that point you could move your miniature and attack, or attack and then move your miniature. Of course, once you were engaged, if you were to leave an attack, it would be at that point you would take leaving engagement damage. More about that later. I don't want to confuse you. And to put it into a nutshell, that's pretty much the game. Your standard miniature game, moving your miniatures about the board. And the terrain is what really can either help and or hinder you. And that went into the movement aspect of it. And the first thing you would see on your card, and it would explain to you in the rules, is right here, your move. And if you look at your move, this is Severus right here. He has a move of 5 spaces. So to be at that point, each space, you would just count them off. One, starting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the whole thing, as I explained to you about the layers or levels, however you want to look at that, was this is what made Heroscape very interesting when it came to moving. Moving's pretty simple. I mean, you can move here, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if you wanted to actually get on higher level, you would at that point count the levels. So it would be 1, 2, 3 to step up, then 4, 5. Now, it takes into account the fact that your character, or your miniature, will actually have to physically climb up at that point those levels to get to that. Or they could use an easier way to get around by just going 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, he couldn't complete that because that would take another one to step up onto this, being 5, 6. Now, stepping down from that area, as long as the terrain was not taller than him, and I'll show you what we mean here. Let's rearrange these a little bit here. Let's make this a little bit bigger than what it is right now. Let's say at that point where Severus is at here, he wanted to step down here. Now in comparison, if you take a look there, I'll hold this a little closer up to the camera so you can see it, you can see that the top of this is taller than Severus. So then at that point, they take this into account. If you were to step down like that off from here, he would suffer 1 point of damage for doing so. Now, given that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, to be able to get up there, and he only has a movement of 5, there's no way he would be able to climb this to get up to that, which is very, very cool. And that's where I mean, as far as the terrain goes in this game, this is what can either help and or hinder you in the game. Now, as far as movement goes, movement is pretty simple. I don't have a water tile here to show you, but if, let's pretend this right here, this outer edge right here was water. If you were to, at that point, step out into the water, your movement would stop, and you would have to wait till your turn before you could actually activate them to move through your water spaces. Now, to step up out of a water space, it would cost you 2 movement points, given the fact that the water spaces are only half of the thickness of one of these tiles. So it would cost you 1, 2 to step back up onto land. Very cool game, and that's the basics of movement in this game. Now, you do have other movement values as far as Heroscape goes. If, let's say, you have flying at that point, you would ignore all elevations and or water, and you would just move your spaces. Pretty much, unless you have flying, that's really the only exception to the rule, particularly with the height. Other than that, everybody else that actually has to walk or is shorter than the distance they're trying to drop down will take points of damage. Unless you have something like that, then at that point, well, it's really not going to hurt this guy to go from here to there. I think that's enough about movement. I think you guys get the basic idea of movement, and if you've played miniatures, you're probably extremely familiar with this. This is just basic movement with the game. Now, the second thing that you would see at that point on your game card, the box, was your range. Now, Severus is an archer. It would be at that point, he has a range of 9, counting the spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, let's move them back a little bit further. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8, 9. So out to here. This particular board is actually longer than Severus's range. If any enemy is within his range, he can fire at that enemy as long as his line of sight is not blocked. If he does not have a clear line of sight, then at that point he would not be able to take the shot. And if he was a melee character, not a ranged or an archer, such as, let me find a really good melee character around here. Well, right here, the Dumatef Guard. So, this pretty hideous looking fellow right here, if he decided to square off with him, his range would be 1, meaning he would have to be adjacent to that particular miniature in order to attack. So as long as he was right there, he could attack, and that would be his range. Pretty simple, pretty basic. Now the third box you would see on your card was your attack value. Now it would give you a number, such as Severus. Severus right here has an attack of 3. So if Severus wanted to roll and attack him, he would take 3 of these dice right here. The skull represents 1 point of damage. And of course they are blank. The blank means at that point you have missed. At that point the roll will be made. He missed that turn, but he has the ability to where he has double attack. So let's see what he does the second time. Did pretty well. He got 1. But Torcolna right here, this guy, he has a defense of 5. 5 blue dice right here, which would be, I guess I should tell you, the last box right here. The red one being your attack and the blue being your defense. You'd roll all 5 of these dice, and as you can see, he had 3 shields right here, which at that point he would take no damage. Very simple game. Now besides that, you would read the cards, and each card would at that point detail for you their powers that they have. Very easy to comprehend. I mean, this is written so anybody from the age of 12 up to 100 could play this game, be able to sit down and read this, and with, you know, very simple to understand the special abilities that the miniatures have as far as attacking, respawning, magic, what have you, would be on that card. So as far as the miniatures operate around the game board, those are the basics. The basics of movement, basics of range, basics of attack, and the basics of defense. Now, the traditional game, if you were playing with 1 or more players, and the reason why I'm going to talk about this is it's important for you to understand this before I get into the solo end of this thing. There is one thing I forgot to mention. Oh. The last thing I forgot to mention about this card, and it should have been the first thing I told you, is each figure has a life point value. Particularly this guy right here, it would take 6 points to kill him and he would be removed from the game. Whereas Severus has 4. Figured I forgot to leave that. I kind of forgot that. So I apologize if you're sitting there watching this video going, well, how much does it take to kill him? Well, each card tells you. And when you get into squad cards, such as these guys right here, where there are 4 models for this squad, each one only has 1 life point. So it takes 1 point of damage and they're off the board, but it evens out because there's 4 of them. So if you were to do that in comparison, this guy that's a hero has 4 life points, but there's 4 of these guys in the squad with 1 point each. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, you understand the life points, you understand movement, you understand range, you understand attack, and you understand defense. It would be at this point, after you have made the map, you have decided what models you want to use for your army, and your opponent decided on theirs, you would get these little guys right here, which are called turn markers. And the whole point behind this was there were 4 turn markers for each player. And they were numbered 1 through 3. Let me see if I can find just keep pulling X's. Anyways, they would be numbered 1 through 3, and you would get 4 of these. The X, which would be your bluff counter. This guy right here was just put in so as you would line your cards up, like so, you would put your turn markers on there. Now, as you've taken your turn, you would at that point lay that turn marker down, showing that that turn has already taken place. And then, of course, you would have your bluff counter that your opponent wouldn't know about. So, as he would look at your cards and see them laying out, he could only speculate if you were going to activate this particular squad another time, or maybe this other card over here was the next one, which added the beauty into the game. There was a little bit of deception, and that's what gets into the next stage. It all boiled down to the initiative. Using this guy. You recognize that, the 20-sider. So after the turn markers were set on your cards, each opponent would roll the 20-sider, and of course the highest number won, and at that point would start the game out. They would take their first turn marker, lay it down, and move their particular model from a spawn point. Now traditionally in the game, you would have areas that they called ruins that were little, basically ruined walls, 90-degree walls that would sit there, and that's where your characters would spawn into the game, as well as the enemy figures. Now, they put that in the master sets in the for a basic reference point to where your characters could spawn in at. It wasn't really necessary to have, but it was a nice visual marker to have on the game board. So as your character would move and you would go through the sequence of turns, after everybody had played out their that round, the 20-sider would be rolled again, and at that point the turn markers would be rearranged, highest initiative would start first, and it would move on from there, resulting in one of two ways to win the game. Either there was a condition that had to be met, particularly if a particular miniature was to reach a certain area to retrieve possibly a valuable item, they would win the game, or basically the last player to have the one last remaining miniature battle to the death on the game board won the game. And that would all depend on basically how you like to play your game. I'm sure everybody had their own particular house rules that they would like to use. Now, one way it could have been done with, just like with this, let's say the little magical item that's the turn marker, that the character, or I keep saying character, I apologize, the miniature went to go pick up. If that particular player had won the game, you would look at your cards, adding your points up, and then at that point whoever had the most amount of points would have won the game. That is Heroscape in a nutshell. That's how simple Heroscape really is. And even though it looks very simple, don't be fooled. This game has a rich amount of complexity into it. And the reason why I say that is the fact that the way that the terrain is built, the more elaborate the terrain is, at that point, the more complexity it leaves into it. And of course, I forgot to leave out one important thing about this terrain, because now that you understand the basics, there was a couple of more rules that were added in there that just add a little bit more complexity to the game and make it more interesting. That is height advantage. Now, as the rules at that point were written, you can see here Severus is actually on a taller surface than this gentleman or creature right here. Now, what that would mean is if he was here, he would look at his card and his attack would be 3. But the fact that he's here, he has height advantage, which means he would now technically get 1 extra attack die for height advantage. And for every 10 levels above, he would get another attack die, which really adds some complexity into the game, particularly if you're the one building the battle map and you plan on using a lot of archers. You're going to want to have a lot of areas that are very elevated to give you that amount of height advantage. That's going to give you the upper hand. Now, it also works 2 ways. It's not all just about having height advantage. The people that are at a lower level that would attack the person that had the height advantage. Now, here's one unique thing with their defense. Normally, he would get 5 defense, but the fact that he is actually below the attacker right here, he would get an additional die for his defense. So there was a lot to think about, particularly in the scenarios. Let's say this particular creature decided to move up and attack these 2. Now, here's some food for thought. Both of these guys get an extra attack die because they have height advantage, so they're going to get 1 more. But he's also going to get an extra defense die because he is actually at a lower level than them from the attack. So that's where some of the complexity came in, and what really made this game very interesting. You add that, the terrain, how it adds into the game, the thought of how it actually takes physical work for your miniature to get up there, counting the spaces, limiting their movement only to their particular physical move on their card, rather than looking at a flat poster with a beautifully printed dungeon on it, but it's all just basically flat, and, well, you know, has a few triangle symbols here telling you this is rough terrain, so your guys reduced movement here. This was way more interesting. This was way more complex, and there was a lot more that went into this. Now, that is the basics, the basic understanding of Heroscape. And if you're still with me so far and you understand everything, you are well on your way to understanding Heroscape. Now, there were some rule changes. And those rule changes have to do with playing Heroscape solo. Now that you understand the basics of Heroscape, here are some of the things that have particularly changed. Now, as they suggest, when you draft your army, let's say I decided on a 200-point army. Now, the AI side is going to have 25 to 50% more than what I have on my side. And you may be telling yourself, well, wait a minute, it doesn't sound too fair. but it does work out. So to be at that point, you draft your army, and you go through and draft the army for the AI side. Depending on how many cards at that point, because they just, in the solo version, you do away with the turn markers. There's really no point for the turn markers. And what I had found to make it very simple was just using D6s, put them on the card to represent who went when. Now, what I mean by that is when you get to your order marker chart, and this is how you're going to set up for this round, who's going to activate on which turn. Now, me personally, I didn't limit myself to 3 cards. I did 5, so there was 5 movements per turn. And even doing that with the army I used, it still took 6.5 hours to get through that game. Now, of course, when I do the demonstration video, I don't plan on doing a 6.5 hour game. I don't think I would have anybody to watch it through to the end. That would just be rather boring. So, now I had printed these off. There's a whole pamphlet that goes with this particular solo rules. If you've played Heroscape before and you understand the Heroscape rules, you really only need to print off 2 pages that you're actually going to need, and you're going to want to have in front of you to reference back to. One is the movement, which I'm going to get into here in a moment and explain to you, and the other one is to do with your drafting. So with the drafting, what it's going to do is tell you how many army cards that you have currently in play, and it goes from 1 to 7. Now, if you have more than 7, little note here on the bottom, for more than 7 army cards, break them up into smaller divisions. And what you would do is take your 20-sider and roll. Now, if we had 3 army cards rolling a 1 through 7, I would place a turn marker on the AI's card, designating it's going to go on turn 1, turn 2, however many turns you decide for your solo Heroscape. Are you still with me there? Alright. Now, the other thing for the solo part of the game, which really makes it very interesting and adds a unique twist to it, is the fact that in the original game you had line of sight, and line of sight, basically, as it was explained in the rule book, you the player looking at your character, and if there was anything that would possibly at that point block line of sight, your particular miniature would not be able to see the enemy to attack across the board as long as they were within range, indicating you as the player seeing the entire game board set in front of you. If you can look and your particular figure has a clear line of sight, and as long as it's within the range of that miniature, that shot can be made. But in the solo rules, it's a little different, particularly for the AI. Now, as far as the AI goes, the creature at that point can only at that point attack something within 6 clear spaces of its line of sight. I'll repeat that again. The creature or figure, however you want to refer to it, can only attack one of your figures has 6 clear lines of sight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll say. Now, why is this unique? Well, it's very unique because of the fact that if I'm playing against the AI, at that point, I could technically go one space out, and I'm out of his line of sight, and be able to, at that point, set my character up on a higher advantage to be able to get better height advantage for an attack. Now, when you play with another player playing this, of course, that's not going to work, because as long as you have a clear line of sight, you're going to take that shot. And there's a reason behind the clear line of sight, and I'm going to explain that in the movement, or as they call it, the marching orders. So when it comes to the marching orders, there are 4 distinct marching orders that the AI, and depending on how you want to do this, you can either select them from yourself. Me personally, I put it in a table where I roll a 20-sider, and then at that point it randomizes it a little bit better and adds a little bit more surprise into the game. But those 4 movement commands are guard. So that particular miniature that the AI is controlling is going to guard this position. 6 spaces of line of sight. Now, of course, if another character, I keep saying character, I am so sorry. If another miniature and or model pass within the 6 lines of sight, at that point, that figure will activate and engage. If you had a ranged, at that point, a model, now it does specify 6 and on exceptions 10, given the fact that his range is 9, and I think that rule was put in there because of the models that have a longer range. So Severus would technically have, if the AI was controlling him, 10 spaces of line of sight. At that point, if anything passed through, he could engage. Now, of course, as far as the range goes, I'm sure you understand range 1 would mean you would have to be adjacent in order to attack. So this particular model guarding this area could activate if somebody passed within the line of sight, but he would have to be adjacent to that model in order to attack. Now moving on with movement commands, that is guard. The other one is patrol, and patrol is, I used this and I really liked it. I really did. It really made the game interesting and added a different approach to it. So if I was to say on patrol, there are 2 points on the board designated by these dice that the AI is going to move this particular model to on its turn. So if it reaches here and there are no models in clear line of sight for it to engage, when it activates the next turn, it's going to move to the next area at that point. Now, if anything was within its line of sight of this model, it would be at that point, it would engage with that model. And then at that point, the battle would begin. Patrol is very cool, and if you play solo, depending on, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more and talk about how to design a theme basically for the battle. And I'm going to show you the battle map I have set up and explain it to you once we get into it. But patrol is one of the movement aspects of the solo version of this that I really do like, and it makes it very interesting. It really does. And the fact that the patrol movement of the models is really what brought the game down to the wire. I mean, I was down to 2 models left on the board, and one of them had 1 life point left, and he was cooked. And I had a wizard that was left, and if something happened to that fighter, it was going to be game over. But how all of my models got picked off was from the patrols moving about the board. So let's move on to the next movement thing. I love the patrol. I could sit there and talk about that for a long time, but we're not. The next one is sweep. And the sweep movement is referring to this particular model is going to move in a direction looking for an enemy. He's going to be basically strafing or sweeping the area, and if any models within his line of sight, he's going to engage. Now, the unique thing about the sweep is it gives you this diagram right here. And if I get that closer, you'll see that each arrow has a number designated to it. This arrow shows the forward area of your model. So the forward model, and if you're confused about that, which I imagine most people that have played Hero Quest are not, but you can always refer back to the card, and you look at the card and it'll show you by this little green dot what is the forward basically area of the model, and you go from there. I think everybody has that, but I just wanted to clarify that just in case. So you look at the sweep and you look at the arrows. You look at where your particular model is, where that model is facing. You roll your 20-sided die, and then at that point you would cross to that number, which is going to give you the arrow to show you which direction that particular model is going to move. So this one is indicating it's going to move off to this area, which would be boom, 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 boom. And then upon its next activation, well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. That is sweep. Sweep means they're activating and they're coming in basically like in a strafing action, looking to engage the enemy. The last, at that point, movement command is meander. Meander is my least favorite one, and it's written into the solo rules, so I use it, but it's one of those that I just really don't like. It for most points of the game, if you ask me, it kind of doesn't make sense to me, but it was put into the rules and I use it. Meander means your model controlled by the AI is going to move in a random area and for no particular reason. It's just meandering around. Now, meander is the same way. You get this chart. You would roll the 20-sided die, and then at that point you would follow the arrow. Now, as far as meander goes, if you look here, the forward area that your character is facing with that arrow pointed forward. So you would look at the movement on their card and you would have that rounding up. So this particular model has a move of 6. Half of it would be 3. Rounding that up would be 4. So he would meander in that particular area 4 spots. And if there's nothing within the line of sight for him to attack, he's just going to keep meandering around the board until at that point he follows something. Now, I did a slight rule twist to that particular rule, how I did mine. You understand the marching orders, the 4 of them, which are the guarding the position, the patrol, sweeping, and meandering. But what I did for mine is I actually just wrote up very simple on a piece of notebook paper utilizing my 20-sider. So when it comes to their turn and that particular card for the AI is going to activate, I would roll the 20-sider. And of course, I just rolled a 20 there, it would come up as Meander. I broke it up into 4 equal parts. 1 through 5 would be guard current location, 6 through 10 is patrol, while 11 through 15 is sweep, and 16 through 20 will be meander. So that is the solo version of the marching orders. Now, this is going to, at that point, conclude this part of the video of explaining the basics of HeroQuest. If there's anything you don't understand, you can always rewind it and play the video from there. But just a very quick recap, how simple the game is. Your figure can do a couple of different things. They can move and attack, or attack and move. But if they attack and move while they are engaged at that point, it is at that point this particular model gets the chance to roll 1 damage die to see if they take leaving disengagement damage. My throat's getting a little dry. Let me take a sip of Monster here. Unless the card specifies that that particular model does not take leaving disengagement damage, and or you have a particular model that can fly, ignoring elevation, it would be able to, at that point, move over an enemy area and not become engaged with that enemy. Now, besides that, as far as movement, and the reason why I saved that towards the end to explain that to you is so you can understand movement, movement, range, attacking, defense, because that borders on movement and attacking. And the engagement and disengagement rule is very unique to this game, and I think almost all miniature games and even tabletop RPGs, it's a standardized rule. If you're going to leave at that point in engagement, you're going to take leaving engagement damage. So, basics. Move, range, whether you have a ranged to where your model has a clear line of sight and can fire a missile, or melee, which meaning you have to be in an adjacent area in order to attack. Defense, your defense value, how many you get. And the thing to not forget, which makes this game so unique compared to a lot of other miniature games out there, the height, the particular board that you have at your disposal. So with that in mind, and let that process for a moment with this, because don't underestimate that particular aspect about this game, because that's what makes this game so complex and really adds a lot of strategy into it. But I think moving on from here, we're going to take a look at the game board, and I'm going to do a play demonstration for you so you can see how Heroscape operates solo and how fun it actually is. Alright.